Bones sound like snapping celery when they give way under pressure. Maya learned that on a Tuesday night on her bathroom floor. Blinded by pain, she texted her brother for help. But the number was 1 digit off. The reply wasn't a question. It just said, "I'm on my way. Porcelain is entirely unforgiving." Maya pressed her cheek against the hexagonal bathroom tiles, letting the icy surface leach the feverish heat from her swelling jaw. Every inhale felt like a serrated knife dragging across the inside of her chest. She tasted old pennies and bile. She needed to move, but her brain had severed diplomatic relations with her limbs. There was a water stain on the ceiling right above the bathtub. It looked vaguely like a deformed rabbit. She stared at it, focusing all her remaining willpower on the peeling brown edges of the plaster, trying to ignore the rhythmic throbbing behind her right eye. Her phone lay 3 feet away, nestled next to the plastic base of a cheap toilet brush. Getting to it required a physical negotiation she wasn't sure she could afford. She dragged her left arm forward. Her dark brown fingers, trembling and dusted with white drywall powder from where she had hit the wall, scraped against the grout. Pain flared, blinding and white-hot, shooting from her ribs straight up into her throat. She bit down on her lip to keep from screaming. A scream would bring him back upstairs. Downstairs, canned laughter erupted from the television. David was watching a sitcom. That was the part that made Maya feel entirely unhinged. The sheer mundane absurdity of it. 10 minutes ago, he had thrown her against the vanity, kicked her in the ribs with his steel-toed work boots until something gave with a sickening crunch, and then walked away because his favorite show was starting. He had even stopped in the kitchen to pop the tab on a can of beer. She had heard the hiss. She finally hooked her fingers around the phone, dragging it toward her face. The screen was severely cracked, a spiderweb of shattered glass obscuring the backlight. She squinted through her good eye, her heavy locks falling across her damp forehead, sticking to the cold sweat on her skin. She needed her brother. Arthur was built like a freight train, a mechanic who kept a tire iron under his passenger seat. He wouldn't call the police. He would just handle it. Her thumb hovered over the shattered screen, leaving small sticky smears of crimson over the digital keyboard. Her hands shook violently. Shock was setting in, making her teeth chatter against each other in a rhythm she couldn't control. "He broke my ribs. Please, help me." She tapped the send arrow. The tiny swoosh sound was deafening in the quiet bathroom. She let her head fall back against the tiles, closing her eyes. Help was coming. Arthur would make the 3-hour drive from Chicago in 2. She just had to survive the next 120 minutes. Her phone buzzed against the tile, vibrating violently against her jaw. Maya frowned, her brow furrowing in pain. Arthur never replied instantly. He was notoriously bad at texting. He would have called. She forced her eye open, lifting the heavy device back to her face. "I'm on my way." The reply was terse. No questions, no exclamation marks. But something was wrong. Maya's gaze drifted up to the top of the message thread. The contact wasn't saved as Arthur. It was a string of digits, an area code she didn't recognize. She stared at the numbers, her exhausted brain struggling to process the information. She had missed a digit. In her blind, frantic pain, she hadn't texted her brother. She had hurled a desperate plea into the digital void, and someone had answered. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the hazy blanket of shock. Who had she texted? A prankster? A creep? Some bored teenager thinking it was a joke? She tried to type out an apology, a frantic, "Wrong number, please ignore," but her thumb cramped, locking up entirely. The phone slipped from her grasp, clattering back onto the tile. She couldn't do this. She wasn't a tragic, resilient heroine from a movie. She was just a 28-year-old accountant with a bruised face, lying next to a toilet, waiting for her lung to collapse. She felt pathetic. She felt angry at herself for not leaving him the first time he threw a plate, the first time he grabbed her wrist too tight. Time distorted. The bathroom light hummed. A relentless, synthetic fly trapped in the fluorescent fixture overhead. 20 minutes crawled by, then 30. The sitcom ended, replaced by the heavy bass of an action movie. Then came the knock. It wasn't a frantic pounding, it wasn't the police. It was 3 sharp, measured thuds against the heavy oak of the front door. The kind of knock that expected an answer. Downstairs, the volume on the television muted abruptly. The couch springs groaned in protest. As David pushed his heavy frame up, Maya held her breath, ignoring the hot spike of agony in her side. She pressed her palms flat against the cold floor, straining to listen. Heavy, uneven footsteps padded across the laminate flooring of the living room. "Who the hell is it?" David yelled, his voice thick with cheap beer and irritation. He unbolted the deadbolt. The lock clicked loudly in the quiet house. "Yeah?" David said, throwing the door open. "The hell do you want?" There was a brief pause. Maya couldn't hear the response. Whoever was at the door spoke in a register so low and calm it didn't travel up the stairs. "Listen, buddy, you got the wrong house," David sneered, his tone shifting from irritated to aggressive. "Back off the porch before I make you." Another pause, then a sound Maya would never forget. It lacked the theatricality of a bar fight. There was no shouting, no prolonged scuffle, just a wet, heavy crunch, like a thick branch being snapped over a knee, followed immediately by a choked, gurgling gasp. A heavy mass hit the hardwood floor with a floor-shaking thud. Silence rushed back into the house, thick and suffocating. Maya dragged herself backward, her sneakers squeaking against the tile. She managed to wedge her shoulders against the side of the porcelain bathtub, curling into a tight, agonizing ball. Her heart hammered against her shattered ribs like a trapped bird. Footsteps started up the carpeted stairs. They were not David's clumsy, heavy stomps. These were measured, deliberate, the faint, expensive squeak of leather shoes hitting the floorboards with rhythmic precision. He was coming upstairs. Maya searched blindly for a weapon, her fingers brushing against a half-empty bottle of Clorox and a plastic comb. Nothing. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the end. The bathroom door, already hanging off one hinge from David's earlier temper tantrum, was pushed open completely. Maya opened her eyes. He filled the doorframe. He wasn't a cop. He certainly wasn't Arthur. He was a tall Korean man, dressed in a charcoal worsted wool suit that draped over his frame with predatory precision. His black hair was slicked back, though a few stray strands had fallen sharply across his forehead. He smelled intensely of cold rain, ozone, and expensive peppermint. His eyes scanned the small, grim room. They passed over the shattered vanity mirror, the smears of blood on the sink, and finally settled on Maya, huddled against the bathtub. He didn't gasp. He didn't rush forward to offer a comforting hand. He just stared at her, his expression utterly devoid of pity. His eyes were dark, flat, and remarkably cold, like looking into the barrel of a loaded gun. He reached into the breast pocket of his suit jacket and extracted a sleek, unbranded black smartphone. He tilted the screen toward her. "He broke my ribs. Please. You sent this," he stated. It wasn't a question. His voice was a quiet, smooth baritone, entirely devoid of an accent. It was the same voice she hadn't been able to hear from downstairs. Maya swallowed hard, the movement sending a fresh wave of pain through her bruised neck. "Wrong number," she rasped, her voice cracking. "Evidently." He crouched down, the fine fabric of his trousers pulling taut. Up close, Maya noticed a microscopic fleck of crimson on his otherwise pristine white shirt collar. David's blood. "Who are you?" she choked out, instinctively pressing herself harder against the bathtub, despite the shooting pain in her side. "My name is Vincent." He tilted his head slightly, assessing her damaged face, the deep, rich umber of her skin now marred by swelling purple contusions. He didn't look disgusted, merely observant. "Can you walk?" "No," she wheezed. "Ribs." Vincent nodded once, accepting the information as a logistical hurdle rather than a tragedy. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't tell her it was going to be okay. He pulled a small, heavy radio from his inside pocket. "Bring the medical kit upstairs," he commanded into the device. "And a blanket. We are moving her." Maya felt a surge of nausea. The room spun wildly. "David," she managed to whisper. "The man downstairs?" Vincent asked, slipping the radio back into his pocket. A microscopic, almost imperceptible shift occurred in his jaw. He will not be breaking anything else. Maya expected to feel a flood of relief. The monster who had terrorized her for 2 years had just been neutralized. But looking into Vincent's hollow, pragmatic eyes, she felt a cold, sinking dread settle into the pit of her stomach. She hadn't been saved. She had simply traded a sloppy domestic monster for something far more efficient and far more dangerous. Vincent reached forward, pulling a clean hand towel from the rack. He tossed it onto her lap. "Wipe your face," he instructed flatly. "You're bleeding on the floor." Footsteps multiplied on the stairs, heavier and faster than Vincent's had been. Maya squeezed her good eye shut, her chest seizing in a fresh spasm of terror. 2 men filled the doorway, entirely obscuring the hallway light. They were dressed in unremarkable dark clothes, but they moved with the synchronized, wordless efficiency of a surgical team or a demolition crew. "Ribs and facial trauma," Vincent said. He didn't turn to look at them. He kept his dark, flat gaze on Maya. "Stabilize her. We are leaving in 3 minutes." The shorter of the 2 men, a stocky guy with a broken nose, knelt beside her. He dropped a heavy black canvas bag onto the tiles with a muted thud. The harsh sound of a heavy-duty zipper tearing open echoed in the small space. He pulled out thick trauma shears and a roll of wide medical tape. "I'm Noah," the man mumbled, his voice gravelly. "Gonna have to sit you up, sweetheart. It's going to suck." Maya didn't have the breath to answer. Noah slid a thick, calloused hand behind her shoulder blades. The moment he pulled her forward, the world tilted dangerously on its axis. Pain didn't just flare, it exploded, radiating from her ribcage into her spine and up into her teeth. A ragged, entirely undignified sob tore out of her throat. She tasted fresh copper as she bit down on her tongue. Her head lolled forward, her heavy locks tangling against Noah's forearm. She felt hot tears sliding through the drywall dust on her cheeks. She wanted to be brave. She wanted to stare Vincent down with stoic defiance, to demand answers, but the raw biology of trauma stripped all her dignity away. She was just a body in agony, leaking fluids, shivering uncontrollably on a dirty floor. "Breathe shallow," Noah instructed, wrapping a thick, rigid band of material tightly around her chest. The pressure was awful, restrictive and heavy, but it instantly locked the grinding bones in place. Vincent watched the entire process with the detached interest of an auditor reviewing a spreadsheet. "Up," Vincent commanded softly. The taller man stepped in. Before Maya could brace herself, they lifted her beneath her arms and knees. Nausea hit her in a violent, rolling wave. She gagged, squeezing her eyes shut as the hallway spun out of control. They carried her down the stairs. Maya forced herself to keep her eyes closed, but she couldn't shut off her nose. As they descended into the living room, a heavy metallic scent punched through the stale odor of cheap beer and wet dog that usually permeated the house. It smelled like raw pennies and voided bowels. Against her better judgment, she cracked her good eye open an inch. The television was off. The heavy oak coffee table had been pushed to the side. In the center of the rug, a large, thick sheet of heavy black plastic lay over a mound. A third man in a suit was quietly rolling up the edges of the plastic, securing it with industrial zip ties. She stared at the shape. It was too long, too bulky. Bile rose sharply in her throat. She snapped her eyes shut, her breath hitching against the tight chest binding. The monster who had kicked her until her bones snapped was in that plastic. Vincent hadn't just knocked him out, he had erased him. A wave of profound, icy shock washed over her. She was a tax accountant. Her daily crises involved misfiled W-2s and depreciating assets. Now she was being carried over a fresh crime scene by men who bagged human beings like yard waste. Cold night air hit her face, smelling of damp asphalt and impending rain. They hauled her off the porch and shoved her into the expansive back seat of a black, idling SUV. The interior smelled aggressively of expensive cherry wood, new leather, and ozone. The door slammed shut, sealing her in a soundproof vault. The engine was a barely perceptible hum beneath her. The opposite door opened, and Vincent slid into the seat facing hers. He adjusted his cuffs, his movements precise and unhurried. He didn't look at her immediately. Instead, he pulled a pristine white handkerchief from his pocket and systematically wiped his knuckles. Maya huddled against the plush leather, her knees drawn up slightly, her arm cradling her bound ribs. She felt dirty. Her sweatpants were stained with dust and small drops of her own blood. She was ruining his upholstery. "My phone!" Maya rasped, her voice sounding like dry leaves being crushed. Vincent finished wiping his hands, folding the handkerchief perfectly in half, then in quarters, before tucking it away. He reached into his suit jacket and produced her shattered phone, placing it face down on the polished wooden center console. "Your brother has been informed that you tripped down the stairs, suffered a mild concussion, and are resting with a female co-worker for the weekend," Vincent said. His tone was perfectly level. He was instructed not to call, as you need to sleep. He responded with a thumbs-up emoji. Maya stared at him, her chest tight. "You impersonated me." "I managed a vulnerability," Vincent corrected smoothly, leaning back against the leather headrest. If he had arrived at that house, he would have found a mess. He would have called the authorities. The authorities would have asked tedious questions. "This is cleaner." "Cleaner," Maya echoed, a hysterical, breathless laugh bubbling up before she choked it down, wincing at the pain in her side. "You killed a man in my living room." "I removed an undisciplined element from the ecosystem." Vincent's dark eyes finally locked onto hers. There was no malice in them, which made it infinitely worse. There was just a chilling, absolute certainty. He was loud. He was sloppy. He brought unnecessary risk to his environment. "I abhor a lack of discipline." Maya swallowed hard, pressing her head against the cold, tinted window. She looked at the passing streetlights, blurred into yellow streaks by her watery vision. She should be screaming. She should be clawing at the door locks. But the darkest, most secret corner of her mind, the corner that had cowered in the bathroom, waiting for the door to be kicked in, was quiet for the first time in 2 years. He was gone. She would never hear those heavy boots on the stairs again. The realization tasted like ash and honey. She hated herself for the profound, overwhelming wave of relief that flooded her veins. She was riding in a car with a murderer, and she felt safer than she had in her own home. "Where are you taking me?" she asked quietly, her voice devoid of its earlier panic. It was just tired now, bone-tired. "Somewhere sterile," Vincent replied, turning his gaze toward the dark window. "You need a doctor, and I need a new shirt." Rain began to fall in heavy, erratic sheets as the SUV descended a concrete ramp into a subterranean parking garage. The tires hissed against the damp pavement, echoing loudly in the cavernous, brightly lit space. There were no other cars, just rows of empty concrete pillars painted with bright yellow numbers. The vehicle rolled to a smooth halt in front of a pair of heavy steel doors. Noah opened Maya's door before the engine even cut completely. "Can you walk? Or am I carrying you again?" Noah asked, his tone devoid of judgment, just seeking logistical facts. Maya looked at the harsh fluorescent lighting of the garage. She hated feeling helpless. She hated the way she had looked draped over his arms like a casualty of war. "I can walk," she lied. She slid to the edge of the seat. The moment her sneakers hit the concrete, her knees buckled. A sharp, searing pain shot through her torso, stealing the air from her lungs. She pitched forward. Strong hands caught her instantly. It wasn't Noah. Vincent had moved with terrifying speed, his grip like iron vices on her upper arms, arresting her fall entirely. He didn't hoist her up like a sack of flour. He merely held her steady until she found her footing. He smelled intensely of peppermint and something metallic. "Pride is a luxury for the uninjured," Vincent murmured, his voice right by her ear. "Lean on Noah. We have a schedule." Maya gritted her teeth, humiliated, and allowed Noah to pull her arm over his thick shoulder. Together, they shuffled through the steel doors into a pristine, white-tiled corridor that smelled intensely of bleach and iodine. It wasn't a hospital. It looked like a high-end corporate lobby that had been aggressively sanitized. They guided her into a wide, brightly lit room dominating by a leather medical examination table and banks of stainless steel cabinets. An older man in a tailored grey cardigan and wire-rimmed glasses was washing his hands at a deep sink. He dried them methodically on a paper towel as they entered. "Dr. Hayes," Vincent said, standing by the doorway, his hands resting lightly in his trouser pockets. She took blunt force trauma to the right lateral rib cage and the left zygomatic arch. Dr. Hayes didn't ask questions. He didn't ask for an insurance card or her medical history. He just pointed to the table. "Sit her up. Let's get that binding off and see the damage." The next hour was a blur of clinical, dehumanizing efficiency. Dr. Hayes was gentle, but he worked with a speed that suggested he was used to patching up trauma victims who couldn't afford to go to a public emergency room. He took portable X-rays, moving a heavy machine around her bruised body. 3 fractured ribs, Dr. Hayes confirmed, holding a digital tablet up to the harsh light. No punctures to the pleura, which is fortunate. The facial contusions are severe, but the cheekbone is intact. Mild concussion. He gave her an injection in her hip. Within 3 minutes, a heavy synthetic warmth began to spread from her lower back, seeping into her chest. The sharp, jagged knives in her ribs melted into a dull, heavy ache. The edges of her vision softened. The panic that had been vibrating in her jaw finally let go, leaving her feeling loose and incredibly heavy. She was dressed in soft, oversized cotton scrubs that smelled of unscented detergent. Noah helped her into a wheelchair and pushed her down a quiet, carpeted hallway, leaving the clinical sterility behind. They entered a room that looked like it belonged in a brutalist luxury hotel. The walls were dark, matte charcoal. The bed was massive, covered in a thick, slate-grey duvet. Heavy blackout curtains obscured whatever view existed outside. It was beautiful, expensive, and entirely devoid of personality. It was a cage. Noah helped her into the bed, pulling the heavy duvet up to her chest. He left without a word, the heavy oak door clicking softly shut behind him. Maya lay in the center of the massive bed. The painkillers pulled at her mind, dragging her towards sleep. But the sheer, bizarre reality of her situation kept her tethered to consciousness. She stared at the minimalist ceiling fixture. The door opened quietly. Vincent stepped inside. He had changed. The bloody white shirt and charcoal jacket were gone, replaced by a simple, fitted black turtleneck and dark trousers. The absence of the suit made him look less like a corporate executive and more like exactly what he was: a predator resting in his den. He walked to the side of the bed, moving silently on the thick carpet. He placed 2 items on the sleek wooden nightstand. The first was a brand new smartphone in a matte black case. "It has the numbers for Dr. Hayes, Noah, and myself pre-programmed," Vincent said, his voice a low, soothing hum in the quiet room. "Your old device was compromised and has been incinerated. Do not contact your brother yet. You sound heavily medicated." Maya turned her head slowly on the soft pillow. The drugs made her brave, or perhaps just stupid. "I'm an accountant," she whispered, her words slurring just slightly at the edges. Vincent stopped, looking down at her, a faint flicker of calculation in his dark eyes. "I am aware." "I understand ledgers," Maya continued, her dark eyes locking onto his. "I understand debits and credits. Nobody sends a private medical team and provides a luxury safe house for free, especially not a wrong number." She swallowed heavily. "What is the debit, Vincent? What do I owe you?" Vincent stared at her for a long, silent moment. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, interrupted only by the faint, muffled sound of rain hitting the glass behind the blackout curtains. He reached out, his long, pale fingers brushing a stray lock away from her swollen eye. The touch was startlingly gentle, entirely at odds with the violence she knew he was capable of. "You texted me for help," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I provided it. There is no debt. I do not traffic in human flesh, nor do I require your accounting services." "Then why?" Maya demanded, a desperate, confused tear escaping her good eye, sliding into her hairline. "You don't know me. You kill people." "I manage ecosystems," Vincent corrected softly, stepping back from the bed. "The man who hurt you was chaotic. He thought power meant raising his hand to someone weaker. He thought power was loud. I found it offensive." He gestured to the second item on the nightstand. Maya shifted her gaze. Resting next to the sleek new phone was a heavy, battered silver Zippo lighter. Her breath hitched. She recognized it instantly. It had a small dent in the bottom left corner. It was the lighter her ex used to nervously flick open and closed whenever he was agitated, right before his temper snapped. The metallic clack-clack sound of it was the soundtrack to her nightmares. "He won't be needing it anymore," Vincent stated flatly. Maya stared at the silver rectangle. It was a trophy, a grim, irrefutable proof of death. A normal person would have screamed. A normal person would have begged to go to the police. But as Maya looked at the lighter, the tight, terrified knot that had lived in her stomach for 2 years completely dissolved. The monster was dead. She looked back up at Vincent, her bruised face settling into an expression of grim, imperfect acceptance. She had traded a domestic tyrant for a king of the underworld. She was in a cage, yes, but for the first time in a long time, nothing was going to hit her. Vincent nodded once, recognizing the shift in her eyes. He turned toward the door. "Rest, Maya," he said without looking back. "You are secure." The heavy door clicked shut, leaving her alone in the quiet, expensive dark, staring at the silver lighter, waiting for the painkillers to finally drag her under. What an intense turning point for Maya. She's traded the terror of her own home for the terrifying safety of a mafia boss's inner sanctum. But what happens when she fully recovers? Will Vincent truly let her walk away, or has she unwittingly tied herself to the criminal underworld? Drop your theories in the comments below. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to smash that like button, share this with a friend, and subscribe for part 5.